For us, design, as we all know, I think that Ed said it best in his workshop, is that we really want to move away from being order takers, and we really want to stop making artifacts, and we're really trying to become strategic business partners, because we know that there's a lot of value in that. But doing that is really difficult. And so I read a fantastic book, and it's a org design for design orgs. Fantastic book, and really started to talk a little bit about the process of design and breaking it up into these two components, where it's the definition and then the execution. Now, a lot of times we live in execution land, right? It's all about do, and sometimes we really want to do the defining moments, and it's hard to do that down. So you really do spend less time on defining, a lot more time on execution, but for something to really feel connected, and for it to have that common thread to be really effective, you know that you have to dedicate that time in that moment of definition. So today, we're going to talk with these three wonderful women about this process. My goal is to break it up into the following topics of discussion. So we'll try to move through them quickly while still giving you as much information and sharing experience. First, it's on framing opportunity and how you would use research and data to identify pain points, about collaboration, group dynamics, and project management, and finally defining outcomes and measuring success. So let's see if we can do this in an hour. So first I'd like to, with introductions, Rika, do you want to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Rika Rosario. I'm a design lead at Deloitte Digital DC. So I'm based out in, way down the road. And I was also, or I guess I am also, President Emeritus of AIJ DC. So I concluded my service 2 months ago, which is super exciting.
How liberating.
I know, right? I'm like, oh, what am I going to do now? So.
Okay. My name is Mary Beth Cradle-Weitzel. I'm an associate professor of graphic design communication at Thomas Jefferson University, and I lead the design thinking curriculum there for all design engineering and business students. And I'm also a president emeritus of the Philadelphia chapter, not so recently.
And I'm Sarah Pash. I'm a senior strategist at Blue Cadet, which is a digital agency based here in Philadelphia. And my background is in museum exhibit design, project management. And I am a current co-chair of the SEGD chapter here in Philly, Society of Experiential Graphic Design.
Excellent, well, welcome. So I think before we really start talking about the actual project, it would be nice for everyone to understand sort of your work environment. Who do you collaborate with on a daily basis? And how many people, if any, do you manage?
So I can start that.
Yeah.
So we're an agency, so we work with outside clients. We also work with partners to kind of complement our own services. So within our agency, we have designers, developers, filmmakers, producers. We partner with people who specify hardware, with people who write content, with people who do image research, and then with our clients who have a variety of in-house capacities. So every project looks a little bit different based on who our client has on their team. In general, we work in project teams of 5 to 7 people for a specific product, but if a client has multiple products that we're developing, it can involve up to 20, 25 people on our staff on a whole account. So my role is managing sometimes individual project teams, sometimes account-wide project teams, but then in terms of direct reports, I have 2 strategists who are learning to do that role as well, who I directly manage.
Yeah, so I'm in the educational sphere, so probably most of you went through a university experience, you know what that's like. I go from, sometimes feeling very lonely, and I work all alone all the time. It's not that sad. And I'm, I guess leading teams of students. And then half of my work, I lead a team of 10 faculty members. So it kind of varies depending on what project I'm working on.
So I work for a very large consulting firm. If you guys are familiar with Deloitte and are surprised they have a digital or creative arm within our very big umbrella. That's what like the Deloitte Digital portion is. So Deloitte Digital Studio is actually a creative agency within Deloitte Consulting, but we're not in-house, so we're completely client-facing. We have a separate in-house Deloitte like marketing communications team that does all our Deloitte stuff, and we have just a bunch of different external clients. Because we're in the DC area, our biggest client is the federal government, but we do federal, state, and local government, so across the country. We also do foundation work, so I can tell you one of my clients right now is the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And then we also do a bit of commercial work, again, in the DC studio. And we also have different studios across the country and also across the world. So we're really, really big. The DC studio is about 250 people. When I started there 3.5 years ago, I was number 37, so we grew a lot, real quickly. And in terms of different types of people or the different teams within the studio, we have, what do we have? We have content strategists. Right now we have a UX team and a visual team, but we're actually restructuring our studio, so that's just going to be combined into one like design team, which is, I think, much better. We also have an engineering team that includes front end, back end, and quality assurance, so QA. Then we have engagement managers, which are managers that focus more on the like business development side of things, and also a little bit of staffing to make sure people are working on different projects and products. I'm missing one. Oh, product management. So we have a product management team, and that team is the one that like manages the day-to-day of like the technical team, so the designers and engineers. So we're pretty robust.
It's quite a word to say. And so when we're framing these questions, one of the reasons why I wanted to share a little bit of background is we really want to think of this in terms of maybe how you manage yourself, a project, or a team. And that can vary, but a lot of the techniques might be the same. We will experience maybe what you're doing in your current job is similar. It might be what you're going to be doing next, or maybe it's what you've already done. And so that's really when you're navigating your career, you can pretty much be exposed to any of these situations. So I hope that you'll be able to take some of that from that conversation. So Sarah, do you want to tell us a little bit about how you kick off a project?
Sure. So I kind of straddle the project management and business development roles. So I often am a sort of conduit between proposing on a client and learning about the client's goals in that process, and then onboarding it to our team if we're awarded the project, and teaching our internal team about as much as I know about the client from those early conversations. So a lot of our work kind of before the official client kickoff is kind of getting ourselves up to speed as much as possible, digesting everything. I mean, there's an aspect of our role as an agency, which is as a third party who's sort of coming at a lot of this fresh. So we're not afraid to ask questions that expose that we don't know everything when we talk with the client. But at the same time, we want to know as much as we can know, and kind of dig into what we think are the most interesting stories before we even talk with the client. So part of our role is to have internal kickoffs and internal kind of briefing sessions to get up to speed. We'll write an internal project brief that outlines the big picture of what the engagement is about, but then also kind of gather any content that the client has given us ahead of time. And then the kind of final step after an internal kickoff is to plan, usually by video conference, and a kind of pre-kickoff meeting where we cover a lot of the kind of logistical project topics. So reviewing the schedule, reviewing roles, reviewing communication on the project, and so we can kind of in some ways get that out of the way before we go in person, so that the in-person time can be reserved for leading creative thinking workshops. We found that we were previously doing an exercise we called Project Pillars, which went through goals, kind of context, project parameters, approach, all of this really important but very sort of basic stuff about the project, which we felt was important to have all the people in the room to hear. What we found is that really sort of brought the energy down. And when we talked about goals and vision, that was an exciting part of that context. But then when we talked about business objectives and scope and schedule for the project, it was like, wow, it kind of like the mood changes. So our goal is to kind of tackle some of those things before the in-person kickoff and reserve that time for a really exciting start to the project where we can talk about goals and then transition right into how we might design around them. So that's, you know, when we change it a little bit based on the project, sometimes it is really important to talk about those big parameters of the project with everyone in the room in person, especially if there are big picture stakeholders who might not be in every phase of the process. So it's not a hard and fast separation, but oftentimes we will start with that kind of like pre-kickoff call.
It's so funny that you say that because I really think it's true, right? You want to harness that excitement, and especially when it's the get to know you phase, and you don't want to kind of bring it down too much because you want people excited about it. Rika, how does this either differ or similar for you?
So our project kickoffs are pretty similar. We do an internal kickoff with our team a lot of the times because our team we have so many people, you know, we work with different people depending on different projects, and so every like new project team is literally like a new group of individuals. So we do spend a little bit of time kind of getting to know each other and our work styles. And then during our internal kickoff, we also kind of try and, you know, we do our homework and learn as much about the client and the problem or maybe not the problem, but the expectations, I guess, for the project as far enough in advance as possible. But we also try and figure out how familiar our clients are with design, human-centered design in general, and also Agile. So again, the majority of my clients are the federal government agencies, and so there's a lot of opportunity for learning there. So we take some time up front to determine whether or not it would be beneficial for us to do like an extra workshop or two to kind of really educate our clients on our process. Because if they don't get it, they're just going to be, you know, they're not going to buy into what we're doing. They're just going to think we're pitching them some like shiny new object, but it may or may not have any impact. But once they go through this process, and I can give you an example, in order to teach people like design and Agile, we have a Lego workshop that we run with clients, and they literally get to experience what it's like to run or be a part of an Agile team while building a city with Legos. It takes like 3 hours. It's actually really fun. But what happens is they experience every single role in a design team, and they also experience the different Scrum rituals or events that happen. So instead of just telling them what the cadence is, they actually like remember it, because they're like, oh wait, I did that, you know, like backlog grooming or whatever, you know, whatever it is, when I was like playing with Legos. So every time they had a question or were a little hesitant on our practices or whatever, we could always go back to that experience and be like, hey, remember that time, you know, we were building like a park out of Legos, like this is what's happening, like this is what this thing is right now. They're like, oh, okay. And so investing that time up front makes the rest of the process a lot easier, and I think that also kind of helps them figure out what their role is and also how much involvement they expect or we expect from them, and also how much time they can actually reasonably contribute to our project. Because a lot of the times, especially in the government, it's hard to get decisions like greenlit. And so if your like main stakeholder is always in a meeting or is like just unavailable, like who is that actual deputy that can make the decision so we can move forward? So those kinds of things are discussed like upfront, and those are the kinds of things we plan for, because we work fairly fast, which is a very uncomfortable speed in the federal government, and so we just want to make sure that everyone knows what's going on and everyone is like comfortable.
Thank you. That's really awesome. So now bringing down the scale a little bit and thinking, Mary Beth, I know I've had this in my own freelance work. What do you do and what tactics do you have when you have a client that wants something, but they've already decided what they want and they just want you to execute?
Yeah, so in thinking about a question like that, so I have my own business, but then I also do a lot of things in the classroom that I think are directly applicable and you can kind of take and move into your own world. So a couple things with that. So this desire to jump to a solution, I think, is human nature. I think most of us want to do that, even probably most of us in this room, despite all our training, not to do that. So I think whether you're talking to students or clients, it's sort of just bringing that desire to the forefront and acknowledging it is really helpful. And there's even people who have studied this, and so if you have somebody who's more of like a data or a numbers person, one thing I would recommend is there's a test out there called the Kolb Learning Styles Inventory, and Kolb is KOLB if you're interested. It's something, so it's basically a test, and I have my students take it. I work with a person over at UC Berkeley who administers the test, but I think there are some versions of it for free online. And it essentially tells you your learning style preference, like do you like to learn more by watching or doing? Are you more intuitive, or are you more logical? And so it shows you what your preferred learning style preference is, but then it also, you can map that to your preference for phases of development. So, and in doing that, you find that most people, their happy place, not necessarily what they're good at, but their happy place is that ideation phase. So yeah, basically just being open about that. Like, I know that's the fun part, that's the exciting part, but there's all this other important stuff that we need to do as well. I also think talking to clients about problem framing and are you asking the right question is a really important thing to think about. And this is an example you may have heard before, but it's something that everybody knows and still rings true. So the old technology now, the iPod was successful not because they asked for a way for people to have a personal music listening device, but it was more about the organization of music. So how can we develop a personal music listening system? So iTunes really facilitated the success of the iPod. So examples like that your clients might be familiar with, it's useful for them to talk about that. So that asking the right questions is so critical. And then you can lead them into some kind of a problem framing exercise. So I like to use a technique called abstraction laddering. And basically you start with some sort of central question. So let's say your question is, how can I build a better chair? So you start with that as the center, and you can ask yourself why questions to become broader and how questions to become more specific. So an example of a how. So essentially you're thinking about a chair. What is a way to build a chair? Let's say out of wood. So then you change the question to how might I build a better chair out of wood? So you see how that is a much more narrow question that you're then focusing on than what you had previously. And then let's say by asking why, we broaden it, and you think why? Well, I want people to be able to sit comfortably. That's why. So maybe we rephrase the question with that in mind. So how might I better enable people to sit comfortably? And there you might come up with answers like a beanbag chair or a swing, where you would not have come up with answers like that previously to the question, how can I build a better chair?
That's fantastic. Going back to your initial, when you were saying about showing them examples of how it's working in the industry, I noticed when I was pitching my own brand refresh that by finding brands that were either similar or in that same industry, I was able to get them to really see the possibilities. But when I tried to use maybe the brands that I find to be super sexy, it was a lot harder because they're like, well, that doesn't apply to us. And so I think that's really important. So Rika, can you tell us a little bit about how you guys might manage it when you're working with clients and they're done with all of this pre-work and they're ready for you to get to designing?
So I guess the way our projects are structured, we have very regular touch points with our clients. And again, we try and set as many just expectations and just be super transparent with them up front so they know like what to expect and what not to expect. Because a lot of the times, they, like you were saying, they just want us to build the app or whatever it is, and a lot of the times like the app is not what you need. You need something else. You need some other. A lot of the times they're solving for the wrong problem, and so every time we especially at the very beginning of a project, we just want to make sure, to Mary Beth's point, like we are asking the right questions to make sure we are solving the right problems. Because, I mean, yes, our team can build apps, but if that's not the solution that's actually needed, if that's not the gap that needs to be filled, then, you know, we just wasted a ton of taxpayer money, which is like not good at all. So we kind of try and manage their expectations, and we really push for a lot of like discovery work in terms of like user research, because then when we are asked those questions, like where is my app or whatever, we can be like, well, based on what we heard from like your users or your consumers, you know, this is something, this is another thing you might want to consider, instead of just like jumping straight to solutioning. Because a lot of the times, you know, figuring out what the right problem to solve for is a lot harder than the solution itself. Especially as designers, like we can just create essentially anything, but is it worth it?
What is the total time, let's say average, that a project takes from beginning to end for you?
It depends. Like a project, we can ship stuff. Our sprints are 2 weeks, so we can ship anywhere from like a few days, depending on the need, to 3 months, 6 months. A year is a pretty long project for us, but again, it's the government, so it's like, that's nothing. Usually our projects are 5 years or whatever. So yeah, it just depends. And it also depends on how, what level of, how comfortable our clients are with the speed and level of like what they might consider risk. And for us, it's risk mitigation, because it's like, you know, if you test stuff frequently and early, then it's less of a disaster later on.
So Sarah, because you also work in these large clients, and do you have similar timelines?
Yeah, I mean, our shortest web-based projects can be a couple of months long, but the longest projects can be 18 months if it involves construction and fabrication and installation, all those things. It's similar. I mean, I think the value of discovery in any length of project is that it can scale with the timeline of the project. Yeah. It doesn't need to be a month-long discovery period or 3 months long. It can be a week or a couple of days to just take some time to kind of frame the project beyond even just a kickoff meeting. So an example, we're working with Ford's Theater in DC. They came to us asking to build a new digital sign. They have like an A-frame sandwich board type of sign with magnets on it that says when, and all you DC-based people, you should go see it now and then go see it in like 4 months. It has magnets on it, so then you can enter when there are tickets still available. And so the visitor services folks come and take a magnet off when the tour is sold out. So we wanted a replacement of that. And so we were talking with them about the RFP and what problem this was trying to solve, and it was clear that they were just thinking of this as like a very one-to-one replacement. In the conversation, they just sort of casually mentioned that at the same time they were trying to write an RFP down the line for an app to address their student groups, because they get typical 8th grade student tour groups in DC, and they're really scattered and they don't get much out of the experience. And so they're thinking like, maybe we'll just build an app for them so they can better understand the story of Ford's Theater in Lincoln. And so we were thinking a little bit about it, in the couple of days before we respond to the RFP for this sign, and thinking like, aren't these students also standing in line in the same place that general visitors are standing to try to find information about the schedule? Like, is there some way that these projects actually overlap, even though one is kind of addressing these general visitors and the other is addressing students? So we called them up before we submit this proposal, and we're like, is this right? Are we understanding your campus right? Are they just standing in line near where this sign is? Is it possible these two projects, even though you're asking for a sign and an app, actually have some overlap in their goals, or could? And they agreed, and so we sort of retooled the process to have a couple of weeks of discovery on this sign that was actually much larger than the sign itself, doing a few observations on how these students line up, what their questions are, and it turned out that they had similar questions as the general visitors about what all the buildings around them are, what the progression of experiences are that they're going to see on their tour. While they're captive in line, what are the basics of the story at Ford's Theater? General visitors also wanted to know that. So what happened is we based on that really short discovery period, and by the way, they decided not to continue the open RFP. They decided, since we asked those good questions, that we should just move forward as partners. So that was a benefit. That was a major success. So we got into the conversation, had this very brief discovery time with some observations and targeted kind of qualitative research, not really anything scientific. But we ended up designing a sign that has a mode for schedule to kind of do that one-to-one from their analog sign, but also has a light interpretive mode. So they decided that they're not going to move forward with this app because students don't often bring their phones on these field trips, or they might run out of battery, or they don't have headphones, or it just introduces a whole host of logistical problems. But they can serve these audiences a little bit better by just having some light interpretive material that they can see on the same sign as they're approaching the theater. So, even just with a couple of days of that discussion, we were able to expand the scope of the sign just a little bit, but totally eliminate the need for this other mammoth project that they were considering, at least partially. So we talk about that a lot actually with other clients, on a small scale. That's not a huge project. Essentially what we're designing for them is a digital sign, but it has these other uses for projects that were also on their docket, and it just took a couple of days to figure out that overlap and how we could leverage it.
I think that's just a fantastic example of the difference between that order taking that we were talking about, that artifact making, and really becoming a partner, right? Because you start to listen to them, and then they open those doors because they really want to share. They love talking about themselves, and being able to make those connections creates this really valuable relationship. And then you're giving them more than they expected, which already sets them up to be super happy. So let's talk a little bit, we've talked a bit about that strategy sort of in starting to define the project and the research that might go behind it. But we all know that there's roadblocks along that way, and that there's group dynamics. And Rika, you mentioned, sometimes you have stakeholders that they're in meetings all the time and they can't get the answer to the questions. So I'd like to actually hear from each one of you maybe how you manage sort of those difficult personalities. And I'm not just talking about cranky people, but again, those people that are really busy and it's hard to get their time to get those decisions. Do you want to start, Mary Beth?
Sure. Well, along those lines, so I recently had the wonderful experience of attending AIGA partners with Yale and does the creative leadership training. Has anyone here attended that? It's so good. It's super expensive. So try to get your work to pay for it, but it's so good. And one of the professors there had sort of gamified this issue, and it was so fun and interesting to interact with. But if you look it up, you might have to pay to play it, but it's Harvard Business Publishing Change Management Simulation. And I did play it several times. The first time I was bad, I crashed and burned, but I learned pretty quickly how to change things around, that the game was smarter than I assumed it was, and it does a good job of, so essentially you have different, you're trying to enact change at your organization, and there's different tactics that you can apply, and what works early on does not work later on, and you're also trying to manage your credibility throughout the whole process. And I felt that what the game was telling me was true. It was actually all based on research and hard data, and it seemed pretty true to life once I realized how smart the game was. And if you play the game, you'll see that in the early stages, it's really advisable to start small with your activities. So lots of kind of one-on-one conversations, gauging personal reaction to what you want to do. I think the last thing you want to do is come out and have this big town hall meeting without ever having spoken to anyone. But I think, starting small, individual conversations, really just kind of walking the walk yourself. Like if you're trying to make something happen, make sure you embody that change that you're trying to happen so that people see you as a model, and also that you're authentic, and that they're more likely to have trust in you if you're really embodying what change it is you want to see happen.
I think, and the speakers earlier this morning, touched on it too, but just kind of remembering that everyone's human, and that when work is just like part of your life. There's other things that kind of influence your day, and if you kind of keep that in mind, then maybe you have you just have a lot more empathy and hopefully a little bit more patience with the rest of your team members, because again, all of us work a little bit differently. We all have different work styles, personalities, preferences. Like I can and a lot of the time, I'm sure this applies to most of us. We have a lot of things going on at the same time, and sometimes it's tough to keep track of everything. So I can tell you, I just had this conversation with one of my senior managers who is managing 2 or 3 different projects. It's business proposal season right now, so she's also leading 3, I think, proposals due next week, and she's also a mom of 2 and a wife and all these other things. But she's also the person that I need to say to approve whatever I submit, and I need her official green light. And I just asked her, I was like, Julia, what can I do to make your life, to get the decisions I need from you in a timely manner? And she's like, honestly, put it on my calendar as a task. It's not a meeting. It's just you literally have to reserve 15 or 30 minutes of my time on my calendar just so I can so I can set it aside and review the comp or review whatever, and that's how you will get a timely decision from me, because I know that it's part of my schedule and it's physically in my work calendar, so no one else can block that time off. And I was done. And so I just blocked probably way too many review sessions or whatever in her calendar, but it was just a small conversation, and again, a very small doable action that I'm pretty confident will get the results I need from her. I'm not sure if that'll work with a client, but at least especially if you work at a big organization, there's a lot of levels of approvals, and so that's something that was kind of brought to my attention. I was it's a fantastic idea.
That is a fantastic idea, and it's all about, sort of that conversation we've been having about managing up and how difficult it is, because it's not that the people, my vice president of marketing, it's not that she doesn't want to pay attention to what we're doing, is that she is being pulled in a million directions. And I've realized that we use Basecamp as a project management tool, and I noticed that what was starting to happen, we were creating this to-do mania, and then she gets overwhelmed, and then she doesn't want to look at Basecamp, and that's not going to work for me, right? So I love that idea. I might take it back and try it. Do you have something more to add?
Yeah, I think actually, scheduling in with managers and others, the review time has also been effective for us. What we think about was just sort of managing interpersonal things on teams, and just how you get a sense of what everyone's personal goals are and where they might overlap or conflict with each other. So a couple of things that made me think about. One is we've started on projects at the beginning, in our internal kickoffs, to list out goals for the project that go beyond just kind of company goals or design goals, but actually by department, what the goals are for the project. So the development team might want to try out a new thing that they've been thinking about or working on, and they think this project might be a good one. The design team might want to improve communication between senior and junior designers. They might have that as a goal. I'm not thinking of a good example now where these conflict, but sometimes they do conflict. And so just kind of getting another level of goal out there is sometimes helpful to just get everyone's vision out on the table. And even to the level of if people have personal goals for something that they would like to learn or improve, having that discussion either individually or as a group. The other thing I was thinking of is just kind of getting the backstory on people on the team, whether it's on the client team or the personal team or the internal team. My first project at Blue Cadet, I was like starting up really quickly. They needed a producer. They hired me, and it was like the kickoff was like 2 days later. So I didn't have a lot of time to understand the internal team and the politics of like who worked well together, who did not work well together. And I had a lot of meetings to try to catch up with individuals, but no one really gave me the full story of, and 4 weeks in, I'm like, why is this not working? Why does the senior designer feel like very uncomfortable? She feels very reserved. And I had to just poke around a lot and try to get, without being gossipy, just try to get like a real story, what's going on. And it turns out, 3 projects ago, she had a big creative conflict with one of the creative directors, and she was worried that he was gonna like drop in on the project and just like torpedo it. And so she was being very cautious on this project because it was a big, important project, and she knew he would take some interest at some point and it was gonna be a disaster. So, but someone else had to tell me that because no one on the team was gonna actually tell me that because they didn't want me to like feel as a new member of the team that things were, touchy in some way. So I guess, and I've kind of like since then taken it on as my role. If I have somebody who I can kind of give that information to, just about how people work and people's work styles and tendencies, things that they might not say, to just kind of like give them that insider scoop, because sometimes there are times when you won't get it from the people themselves.
I think that's why it's so crucial sometimes, some projects can be remote projects where you're not seeing people's faces all the time. How do you really pick up that nonverbal communication to understand these pain points on teams that they're not talking about or they might not know? And that's really interesting, but can be so valuable, especially when you're working with internal teams. How many people here work in sort of an in-house environment at this point? And team alignment can be really hard and frustrating in a way. And it's not that everyone's not working towards a common goal, but it's how do you set those priorities and make sure staying aligned.
Yeah. Can I just add something really quick that just reminded me of something? So a lot of the times, especially when we're bringing on new people or when we're like interviewing people, we also emphasize like definitely know what you know, but also be honest about what you don't know, because knowing you don't have to know everything. But you can't fake it, because especially like in tech, we'll find out real fast if you can't hack it, and that's okay, because again, at least for us, like our teams are large enough where we can complement and supplement people's skill sets to make sure that we, at least as someone who like staffs a project, like I can make sure that I can pair a designer who's really, really strong in one area with someone who's maybe not as strong in that same area, but can complement in different ways, because we've had instances where I just had to roll off an engineer because he said he knew front end and he didn't, and that like put our project back by like 4 weeks. And as supportive as we want to be, especially from like a professional development perspective, unfortunately, because he didn't say anything up front, we didn't put in the appropriate infrastructure for him to succeed. Like all he really needed was a tech lead, and he would have been fine, and our project would have been fine. But unfortunately, like it was not fine, because he was trying to, he was doing his best, but it just wasn't working. And so knowing what people are good at and also not so good at is super helpful, especially at like the onset of a project.
Absolutely. So that brings us to communication, the core of everything. So do we want to talk a little bit, Mary Beth, maybe about what types of tools you use and tactics for really communicating effectively through the life of a project with internal and external stakeholders?
I'm not hiding the fact that I'm looking off of notes. So say the question again, tools for communicating effectively with internal and external stakeholders.
And if it's just external, working with a client, or even on college campus, there's a lot of different stakeholders in that environment as well.
Yeah, I'm trying to think about that. I mean, tools, I guess, if we want to talk like tech, there's a lot of things that I think can help with that, especially because we're working so much more remotely these days. And I'm really excited to check out that new Envision tool that was mentioned earlier. I think I mean, what I use are tools like Trello and Ganter I use as well. Those are both free at certain levels, but these sort of, Trello in particular is really easy to learn and fun and visual, and it kind of makes like the communication process playful and enjoyable. So I guess those would be my recommendations, if we're talking about like technical aids for communication.
That was absolutely amazing.
You like it?
Tutorial teams, because you can learn it in 15 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Which one?
I have to say, we found in our particular company that each team or department is using their own tools. And at first, our chief technology officer was really adamant. No one to use Slacks, we're using Microsoft Teams. And suddenly the sadness. And it was great. He walked up to my desk and he said, you know what? I'm kind of done trying to force people to use things that aren't working for them. And so I find that to be an excellent tool to communication is that, once again, listening as well as adapting and also knowing when not to use technology, when you need to go either call someone, get them on video, or walk up to their desk. I think that's really crucial in that space as well.
I know how many of us have experienced that miscommunication of tone over email where it like really didn't mean it that way at all and someone took it the wrong way. So where you can FaceTime is really important.
I think there's a balance between, we sort of shift between extremes. We use Slack, we use Airtable, which is sort of Trello-like in its organization abilities. So we'll go periods where we use, the whole team is like really active on Slack. There are all these threads going, we're like figuring stuff out, doing it, and then someone's like, I'm confused, I can't keep up. We need like a meeting to hash this out. And then we have a meeting and it's great, and we have a bunch more meetings and they're all great, and then someone's like, too many meetings, I can't get anything done, and then we like go kind of to the other extreme, and I feel like there is a balance that it's really hard to find, and sometimes you have to just accept that sometimes you're going to need more meetings, and sometimes you're going to be able to work virtually more successfully, or meetings meaning face-to-face or like video conference if you have remote participants, and it's okay if it isn't always one totally consistent way. There are times when you need more like flow time and fewer in-person meetings, and you prefer to just Slack your team members, and then other times when you really need that.
I can actually really support what you're saying by a colleague of mine did, it was a rather informal study in the classroom. She attempted different ways of communicating with her students about classwork that were more beneficial to introverted personalities. And then she also did other activities that benefited extroverted personalities. And she found, and she kind of polled the students unbeknownst to them, like why she was doing about what their preferences were of the multiple ways of working. And ultimately, she found that, I guess you have to know your team and know their preferences, but if you're dealing with a large number of people, I guess just considering that you're going to have very introverted people and very extroverted people, and how can you communicate in ways that make everybody comfortable, if not always, all the time, at least kind of sharing that comfort across.
So we were just actually talking about that in our studio, because there's a bunch of us again, and we have an open floor plan, an open studio, and so when we're trying to work and trying to carve out like an hour or two of just like straight design work is really tough, because it's always interrupted by something. But when you do have that like hour or so of just nothing on your calendar, the risk there is like you're working at your desk and then like someone taps you on the shoulder to ask you a question or whatever, and we want to be accommodating, and we want to have opportunities for that like impromptu FaceTime, but it's also somewhat disruptive. Mm-hmm. And so we were talking about a couple of our design leads were talking, and we were just like, I think we need flags, like little like do not disturb, like physical on your desk, like do not disturb flags. We were equating it to like if you guys have been to like Fogo de Chao, like the red and the green thing, because sometimes at first like we tried just like if you have your headphones in, then you probably don't want to like be bothered, but that was not working because people would just still like ping you. So we literally were pitching just like physical, visuals that we can stick on our monitor, like stick on our displays and be like, please do not bother me, I'm on a deadline or something.
I like that idea too, because the headphones, I'm either standing up or sitting down, and then I'm attached to the cord, and then I'm not, I can't seem to use that. So tuning people out becomes the practice. So talking about communication though, we're having conversations on Slack. We're doing them on the Basecamp. We're on Trello. We're having hallway conversations. We're making phone calls. We're sending emails. How exactly do you make sure that when the decisions are being made, that you're staying aligned and communicating what those decisions are? Sarah, do you have any ideas?
That is the challenge. I mean, I think it kind of evolves as the project communication evolves. Like, I don't know that for us there is a consistent way of doing it every time. Like, we do use Basecamp on projects, and when major decisions are made, that is definitely a part of what is logged on Basecamp. Can I ensure that everyone has actually read that and heard it and digested it? Probably not. So we have to repeat it in a variety of other ways. And changes in scope or changes in direction, it's unfortunately like repeat to make sure like the really key things get through to the right people. I mean, you can employ all the tools under your belt, but you have to like somehow get it to the people.
I think that discipline of building onto a team and that repetition is just human nature. Even if you were to say, we have a phone call, we need to realign, someone might have gotten an email and missed that portion of the phone call, so completely agree. So we're getting close to wrapping up, so I really want to talk a little bit about the outcomes and how do you reward your teams, or how are your teams rewarded when you're completing? Do you set milestones? What does that look like in terms of keeping people engaged, especially maybe when you're doing those longer timelines? Rika, do you?
Yeah. So Jen was kind enough to like send us draft questions, and we were just kind of like plopping notes. And my very short answer to this was like food. I mean, I'm Filipino, and so food is a very central part of our culture and the way we communicate with people. And so it's also very like. I'm sure for, again, a lot of you, it's like a very celebratory thing and a communal thing. And so whether it's like kickoff or like end of project, or even like, if we had a really shitty day, we need to go like eat our feeling kind of thing. Like that's how as a team we kind of come together. And so that's just like one of our ways. Or we work out together, we like box together, which is pretty fun and potentially dangerous, but that's okay.
Depends on the health of the project at that time, right? I find sometimes even taking breaks with, my VP, let's go out for a walk, let's just step away for a minute, and I think that really helps to build that relationship, while maybe we'll talk about something along the way that solves a problem that we haven't been able to solve. Excellent, thank you. So I'm going to pull it out a little bit and talk a little bit in terms of takeaways. I think that everyone in these two-day conferences has done a really great job at takeaways. So if you were to each share your top takeaways in terms of this particular subject of developing a roadmap in leadership. Do you want to start, Mary Beth?
Sure. So I think the best thing you can do for yourselves as a professor who's educating millennials, and I've learned that I am actually on the cusp of being a millennial, which I don't identify with at all. I guess depending on who you talk to about who's a millennial. But I think learning about generational differences in your management can be extremely helpful. And so it's not to the point where you're like, okay, you're this age, you fit in this category, and I will treat you this way. Don't do that. But you definitely want to study, what are some sort of generalizations based on our society and how people have grown up and different parenting styles. What's going to resonate well with millennials, because they're sort of a very different breed and I've been reading a lot on the subject, and I actually really recommend a book that I brought with me, which does not have the best cover design, but I think it's a really good book. Not everyone gets a trophy. By Bruce Tulgan. If anyone wants to look at it later, you can. But some of the things I've been reading have been talking about how typically as people age, they sort of look to older generations as a model for how to behave, and they choose to assimilate to the behaviors of that older generation. And a lot of people believe that where we are in a society right now is that it's sort of the reverse is happening, is that older generations are becoming more like millennials. And a lot of that has to do with their tech-savvy behaviors and things like that. But millennials have, in general, very different wants and needs based on their parenting styles and their, they tend to want a lot more heavy management styles than older generations may have been used to. So that's something worth considering, that you want to have kind of small, significant rewards at places that they can expect, and they generally are not going to stick around for like vague long-term promises, that it's more kind of a transactional and short-term relationship.
Yeah, I think back to the whole, just remembering everyone is human, and being not only kind to other people, but also remembering to be kind to yourself as well. I mean, a lot of us in here wear a ton of different hats. Like we are an employee. Some of us are employers. Some of us, we have family, we have friends, we volunteer for AIGA or other organizations or other community groups. And this is something I actually took away from Sue Matthews-Hale, who's the current AIGA president. Came to DC in November 2014, and she just said that some days she's a really great mom, some days she's a really great senior executive at her former position at LeadCon. Some days she's a really great AIGA president, but she's not all those things at the same time, and that's okay. And that really resonated with me, just because I feel like I always try and be 100% at like every single role I have to play, but that's like physically impossible. So I think remembering to be kind to yourself, and also not putting that kind of pressure that you have to be like at 100% in all your different roles at the same time is super important.
That's great advice. So I know we have to wrap up, so this is what I encourage you. I'm sure there's lots of questions. I did not leave room for Q&A because we were having great conversation over here. But one of the things that my biggest takeaways is ask questions, and don't be afraid to do that. Ask about everything. How does your department work? How do you handle this? And so you have these three amazing women here, and maybe after the next break, in conclusion, go up and ask those questions that you want. Don't be afraid. We're all here to help each other out through this process. So thank you so much, and thank you all three for